September 22nd, 2022. I arrived back from coaching school, I dropped my bag, I grabbed my phone, I go onto YouTube, and my YouTube recommendation recommended me this video. My curiosity was piqued to the fullest. So much so that in mid-October, I was thinking about making my own WW1 tier list. And so, here we are. So, thank you Spectrum, you were my second inspiration to start a new video. The first guy was living ironically in Europe. I also don't know how long this video will be, considering I wrote a long script for almost all the belligerents in World War I. So, I suggest you guys should watch this video with a little snack. But anyways, enough jibber jabber, let's get started to the World War I tier list. Nedj and Hasa. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I am not Arab. Anyway, they joined the war in 1915 and didn't even bother to fight the Ottomans. Did fuck all. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the lists are peak of their game, high potential, did okay, mediocre, pretty bad, and did fuck all. Asir. Same goes for them. Joined the war in the same year, but couldn't even be bothered to do something. Not even try to revolt against the Ottomans. Ironically, these two emirates would go on to make Saudi Arabia, which these two would claim land if they had actually bothered to do something rather than join and get a participation trophy award. Another belligerent to be placed in did fuck all tier. Austria-Hungary. One of the most unstable countries in World War I. I honestly don't know where to start. Let's start with the invasion of Serbia. Austrian Chief of the General Staff Hejaz sent his first offensive in Serbia on August 12, 1914, in which the Austro-Hungarians would end up losing 100,000 soldiers in an unexpected defeat. On September 8th, the same year, the Austro-Hungarians had launched a second invasion into Serbia. The outcome was the 5th Army were pushed into Bosnia whilst the 6th Army was held by a Serbian counterattack. Then Austria-Hungary finally began to see some progress. They launched a third offensive on November 5th and captured the capital of Serbia, Belgrade. They had held a parade there, only for the city to be recaptured by the Serbs just a couple of days later. The German Empire saw these major struggles and decided to help them, after the Austro-Hungarians had previously asked them for help. They started a joint invasion in October 1915, and soon after, Bulgaria joined the side, which now turned into a triple invasion. With that, Serbia finally fell, with help all around them no less. As for their performance against the Russian Empire, it was pretty amusing. The Russians took almost the entire region of Galicia as a result of abysmal performance from Austria-Hungary. However, the Germans intervened and pushed almost right back into the same spot Austria-Hungary and Austria-Empire had started. The front line didn't change much until Russia capitulated, handing free territory to the Central Powers, but once again, Austria-Hungary was relying on German Empire. However, there were a few positives. Against Italy, they had the benefit of defense lines and were fantastic in the mountain fights, giving the Italians a massive headache. The invasion of Montenegro was completed with ease as they breezed through Novi Pazar and the city of Verane, conquering Montenegro in just 12 days. And against Romania, despite the Romanians having a head start occupying small parts of Transylvania, the Bulgarians invaded from the north, diverting Romania's attention, and so the Germans and Austro-Hungarians invading Romania together and had them almost fully annexed. Despite me reporting all these positive results, it's still impossible for me to ignore that Austria-Hungary was relying on the German Empire in order to stay on track against the Allies. Not to mention that Hejaz had ignored advices and tactics from the German officials. So with that being said, pretty bad tier. Belgium. The Belgians were forced to join the war because, despite being neutral, the German Empire found a way to go around France's defence, invading through Belgium. The Belgians fought bravely in every battle against the Germans and held a resistance in Antwerp to assist the British expandatory force and also assist the French too. Furthermore, Belgium would go on to have a victory at the Battle of Asir, where, alongside Great Britain and France, they would capture the city of Dixmude between 31st of October and 2nd of November 1914, and resisted bravely at the First Battle of Ypres, defending Flanders perfectly. But on the same year, the Germans, whilst invading Belgium, would commit atrocities and kill civilians along the way, as it would be known as the Rape of Belgium. For a long period between 1915 to 1917, the Belgians would be under half occupation from the German Empire. But that was all to end in 1918, as Belgian soldiers pushed the German soldiers all the way to Bruges. Speaking of the German soldiers, On November 9th, 1918, they would start their own revolution against the German officers and loyalists, handing Brussels back to Belgium. 2 days later, the German army signed an armistice, and on November 23rd, the remaining German troops would leave Belgium, with Belgium now having full liberation. As for Africa, well, the German Africans seemed no threat to the Belgian Congolese. It was as if they didn't move at all. All in all, Belgium had an unexpected performance and resisted bravely in both Europe and Africa against the Germans. Retaliating the German Empire invasion back then would seem hellish for everyone, but Belgium did retaliate, just like that. Well done, Belgium. You get in the did okay tier. Brazil. They joined the war in 1917, being the only country in South America to be involved in the war. Initially, Brazil had 54,000 men in the army, but they didn't send anyone from the army, only navy. They sent some destroyers to the French, and that was it. Did fuck all. Bulgaria, livid after losing the Second Balkan War, and angry at Serbia for stealing their idea of uniting all the Serbs, Bulgaria took the opportunity to take revenge against Serbia when the Central Province promised Bulgaria land. Along with Austria-Hungary and German Empire, they all invaded Serbia together. The Bulgarian occupation was noteworthy, with Kingdom of Romania occupying 2/3 of Serbian land. They would maintain the occupation until September the 29th, 1918, one day before they surrendered. Meanwhile, the Serbs evacuated into Albania and Kingdom of Greece. Kingdom of Bulgaria would help Austria-Hungary to chase down Serbs in Albania, whilst Kingdom of Bulgaria itself would chase the Serbs in the Greek region of Macedonia. Yeah, back then World War I seemed more odd than you think nowadays. Anyways, Kingdom of Greece would join the war in 1917, and alongside Kingdom of Serbia and the Allies, they would put pressure on Bulgaria, with the Serbs successfully liberating themselves and Kingdom of Greece occupying parts. The Bulgarians were invading when they were trying to catch the retreating Serbian army back in 1915. Kingdom of Bulgaria couldn't handle the pressure and surrendered on September 30th, 1918. But you can't say the Bulgarians did poorly. In fact, they performed streets ahead of anyone's prediction. So with that being said, a small country causing big mayhem gets in hypertension. China. The Chinese joined the war in 1917, and the biggest contribution was adding an extra teaspoon of salt to their rice. Like, seriously, Wikipedia didn't even include them in the personal. That just shows how much they cared about the war. Like, fam, they didn't even bother to take the German colonies near the port. Rock bottom of did faculty. Kingdom of Hejaz. Again, hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Okay, I'll stop. They joined the war because Sharid of Mecca found out that the Ottomans were planning to murder him, and so he agreed to work with the Brits if they had supported an Arab revolt against the Ottomans. The British said they would, and so the Brits and the Sarifian army kicked the Ottomans out of the Arabian Peninsula. In the end, they did give the Hejazis what they wanted, except Palestine was swapped out with Israel. Britain, always the ones to start drama and barely keep their promise for other countries because it doesn't suit them. Don't worry, Hejaz, we feel your pain. As for your contribution in the war, you did okay. France. France declared war on the German Empire on August 2nd, 1914. France was prepared well, but the German Empire had no time to deal with their border defense. Therefore, they opted to go through Belgium, as I mentioned before. Midway through the Belgian invasion, and France had the goal of taking Alsace-Lorraine. The Germans inflicted severe losses, and so the French advanced through Siam. However, the Germans decided it was time to defend and push the French right back to where they started. Soon enough, the Germans would advance through northern France, after advancing the Ardennes, and they would win the Battle of the Frontiers. France and Great Britain would soon set a retreatment, before stopping the retreatment and prepare for battle. On September 5th, 1914, the First Battle of the Marne would occur. The French won decisively. The reason for this victory was that the Germans had opened a gap between the First and Second Army. The tables turned, and now German Empire was retreating. The Germans reached the Aisne River and started digging to hold position. Britain and France do the same, and both sides had to settle on the trenches, since they were so close to Paris at that time. Soldiers from both sides would suffer through the terrible consequences, and thousands of men would die to the machine guns and barbed wire. The French warfare wouldn't change much in 1915, but in 1916, France would put the German Empire under pressure, as they kicked off their own brutal battle, the Battle of Verdun. It lasted 9 months, and France took an outstanding victory. the most famous battle of the entire Western France campaign in my personal opinion. France also apprised Britain that they should also do something to seize any German progress. So Great Britain started their own brutal battle, the Battle of the Somme. In 1917, French General Robert Nivelle held the Nivelle offensive, which wasn't the best, but redemption would come in the second battle of Pas d'Ale. But despite losing the first, France alongside their allies made light work of German Empire. In 1918, France had to face a German counteroffensive, but with American intervention, the tables turned once again, and now the Allies began a counterattack. We all know what happened after Germany surrendered, but let's keep an eye on France for a moment. Was this a war which France easily surrendered? No. Did they fight bravely until the end? Yes, absolutely. Well, in all honesty, they had their fair share of failures. In particular, I don't think the Allied retreat should have been that close to Paris, seeing that both sides noticed it would turn into a melting pot of chaos if they fought on the ground instead of digging in. But I can't ignore considerable decisions from French Commander-in-Chief Joseph Joffre. As for Africa, well, let's just say that Great Britain and France made it look easy when they took German colonies in Africa, which would give France an even bigger score. But let's not exceed the chances into peak of their game, okay? They weren't invincible. I think high potential is good enough for them. German Empire, a world-class belligerent of the First World War. The German Empire carried their team. If the Central Powers had CSGO ranks, German Empire would be Global Elite, Kingdom of Bulgaria would be Master Guardian Elite, Austria-Hungary would be Gold Nova 1, and Ottoman Empire would be Silver 4. But let's get back to the topic here. As I said 3 million times before, the German Empire went through Belgium to avoid a prolonged conflict in the Franco-German border. But there's more to it than that. German Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen had his own plan. It was formed between 1906 and 1914, and it went like this. Everyone knew the Russian Empire was so big and clumsy it would take them a serious amount of time to mobilize and prepare themselves for the war. So Germany had the perfect idea of defeating France as soon as possible, then move all the troops to the Russo-German border and defeat the Russian Empire. They also thought that the invasion of Belgium wouldn't bother Great Britain. They were wrong, and so Great Britain joined the war. German Empire, though, didn't waste much time taking city after city in Belgium. In these conquests, the Germans committed huge atrocities and killed civilians. Although the Belgians would fight bravely and retaliate the Germans every so often, the Germans had the superior strength to annex half the country and, more importantly, the capital of Belgium. Skipping the part where German Empire won the Battle of the Frontiers, they pushed into northern France and were 70 kilometers away from taking Paris. However, they made a slip-up, opening a gap between the First and Second Army and had no other option but to retreat. Before that, the Russian army was ready for war, and now the German Empire was having a two-front war. But still, Germany fought well, winning the first battles of Stahluponen and Tannenberg. As a result, they successfully kicked the Russians out of Prussia and helping Austria-Hungary, almost reclaiming the entire region of Galicia. Back into the Western Front for a moment, and now German Empire and the Allies were into underground territory. Kind of. They would result in no man's land and the trenches, which proved to be difficult for both sides. However, it didn't bother the Germans to aim at the moving Allies and shoot at them with their machine guns whenever they had the opportunity to do so. In 1915, barely anything changed, just soldiers dying in general. However, in 1916, the Germans had to take two separate brutal battles. The first one was the Battle of Verdun, where the Germans couldn't restrain a French victory, and the second one was the Battle of the Somme. Only this time the Germans came out victorious. Returning to the Eastern Front once again, and by the end of 1914, the Russian Empire won the Battle of the Vistula River in late October. German Empire's response was a slight win at the Battle of Lodz, keeping Russian Empire at bay. Come 1915, and the Germans will win the second Battle of the Marusian Lakes, another victory at that particular lake, as they had also won the previous one in September 1914. By mid-1915, the Germans had full control of Russian Poland, making the Russians take a massive retreat. Fast forward in June of 1916, and the Russians would start a counter-offensive against the German Empire and Austria-Hungary, which went well until they ran out of supplies. From this point on, the German Empire would win battle after battle, and come February and October 1917, the Russian government would have to deal with two revolutions. The Germans saw this and funded a man called Vladimir Lenin to start a communist takeover. They had also given him a train ride back home from Switzerland to Petrograd, now St. Petersburg. I have more to talk about the October Revolution when we get to the Russian Empire. So with that, the Germans technically took out the Russian Empire single-handedly, and in March 1918 they gave them a harsh treaty, which Poland and the Baltic Duchy would be under German nobility. But that would be the last positive outcome of Germany's war efforts. People back home in Berlin were starving, and despite a successful operation named Operation Alberich, American intervention was the last thing the Germans wanted to hear. So the Germans went full try-hard mode. The spring offensive was okay, I guess. I mean, they won the Battle of the Lys, but only a little. This would happen again at the Third Battle of Aisne, which, okay, fair enough. They kept the British at bay, but only a little again. The last attack was the Second Battle of the Marne, which by then the United States arrived on the scene. With all their supplies spent and soldiers starting to mutiny, the Germans would no longer hold off the Allies and eventually surrendered on November 11, 1918. Outside of Europe, German Empire's performance in Africa and Asia were rather dreadful. The Allies quickly took their African colonies, and in Asia, Japan took the islands in the Pacific, and Australia taking German New Guinea. As for their support to their allies, they helped Austria-Hungary whenever they needed and kept their promise for Bulgaria to give the land that they converted. Being an honest and mature ally and not a scumbag and an ego does help their reputation. I may be exaggerating, but Wilhelm II deserves a guard of honor. Anyway, all in all, fighting a 3v1 on the Western Front, which would soon turn into a 4v1 thanks to the USA, and dealing with a gigantic bear in the Eastern Front is something mind-blowing. And yet the German Empire dealt with both fronts successfully. Truly deserved to win the war, if you exclude the atrocities they committed, of course. Peak of the game, and highest of them all in this tier list. My home country. Well, what can I say about my home country? Before we even joined, there was a disagreement between King Constantine, whom was in favour of joining the Central Powers, and Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos in favour of joining the Entente. For a brief time, tensions were heating up, but eventually the king abdicated and Kingdom of Greece joined the Allies in 1917. With Allied reinforcements, Greece opened up new fronts in Macedonia and conquered Albania. In the Macedonian front, the Greeks defeated the Bulgarians at the Battle of Skra-Dilegene. Kingdom of Greece, alongside France, also conquered Skra, as well as winning the Battle of Dobropol, but losing the Battle of Doira. However, the Salonika army was too strong to be defeated effortlessly and would help Kingdom of Serbia liberate themselves from the Bulgarians and Austro-Hungarians, as well as liberating northern Epirus for the 12,000th time. Not long after, Bulgaria surrendered, and thus I can validate the war with Bulgaria a Greek victory. Also with Allied help, made prodigious moves in southern Serbia, but it wasn't only Allied help. Kingdom of Greece held its own ground. All in all, middle of did okay tier. Italy. Mighty Italia was instrumental in World War I. Pause for sarcasm. They were literally obstructive in the Italian front. But I need to elaborate on how the Italian front went. Basically, the Italians switched sides after crummy relations with Austria-Hungary. Eventually, these two were fighting one another in the Alps, and both of the country's soldiers converted into mountaineering. Even though the Austro-Hungarians were key figures at the Mountain Alp battles, the Italians got the better of them after 12 bloody battles of the Isonzo. The first battle of the Isonzo was a minimal advance for the Italians. The second one was more tactical and victorious for the Italians. However, Austria-Hungary had eventually caught up with them. The third battle of the Isonzo was won by Austria-Hungary, but the remaining battles would be won by Italy. Some of them are inconclusive, but still some are part of Italian victory. Though the 12th battle would be a decisive victory for the Austro-Hungarians, capturing the Italian forces and forcing them to retreat to Capello, and they stayed there until the end, where the Italians beat the Austro-Hungarians at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto, and Austria-Hungary surrendered and collapsed at the same time. Although Italy dominated, the deaths between them and Austria-Hungary are a space of 251,000, with Italy having more deaths significantly. It also felt like the Italians made limited progress as the Austro-Hungarians obliterated them in the 12th and final Battle of the Isonzo. And then the Italians wonder why they got such pint-sized territory. But let's think of the positives. They performed 100 times better than what they did in World War II. So I don't think they deserve to be higher than mediocre. Japan. There's two things these guys did in this war. Just taking German islands in the Pacific and helped Britain here and there. With the Japanese Navy employed ships in Singapore to suppress the Indian Army from committing mutiny against the British government, and when Britain requested naval assistance from Japan on December 18, 1916, the Japanese sent 4 destroyers to Malta, a British colony. However, I don't think that's enough to rate them high on this list. I mean, sure, they hypothetically fought in a war, but my personal attitude doesn't see it that way. I personally think Japan took the more effortless territories and then got to lay down until Britain asked them for naval assistance. Call me harsh if you want, but for me, Japan goes and did fuck all tier, but definitely higher than all the other countries in that tier, that's for sure. Kingdom of Montenegro. From the very beginning, the Montenegrins would fight side to side with the Serbs during Austria-Hungary's first attempts to conquer Kingdom of Serbia. But after Serbia's occupation, the Montenegrins seemed to struggle against Austria-Hungary. On January 5th, 1916, Austria-Hungary gathered their forces and advanced towards Blenia and Bielobolje. The Montenegrins battered them at the Battle of Mojkovac. However, that was probably their only victory against them. As I said previously, the Austro-Hungarians took the city of Barane after they marched through Novi Pazar. Later on, the Austro-Hungarians advanced westwards from Pristina and also took Peć and Velika. The 5th Division also captured Prizren. On January 12th, Montenegro surrendered the day after. Austria-Hungary took care of the Montenegrin capital Cetinje. For the last 2 years, Austria-Hungary would have full occupation of Montenegro until Serbian forces came to liberate them, and they did just that, liberating Podgorica and with it the entire country. I personally think Montenegro could have and probably should have been smarter on grand strategy. Mid-war with Serbia, they could have put pressure on the Austro-Hungarians and launched an offensive on the border between them. Most of you might argue that such a small country can't cause mass effects, which, fair point, but what we can all definitely agree on is that they could have done better. Pretty bad tier. Ottoman Empire. If the Austro-Hungarian campaign was quite shocking, the Ottoman campaign was an absolute catastrophe. For starters, the Bergman offensive in the Caucasus was successful for the Ottomans, except the Russians had advanced winter equipment and help from the Armenians in the captures of Karakosse and Dogubezhazhit, with 9,000 Ottoman soldiers killed and 3,000 imprisoned. On December 15, 1914, the Ottomans redeemed themselves by winning the Battle of Ardanan, but in the space of a week the Russians won their own battle at Sarikamish, with only 10% of the Ottoman army returning safely. Following on from that, the Persian campaign was inconclusive, though I still think it was a Russo-British victory, and there was a high number of casualties for the Ottomans. Barely anything changed in the conflict with Great Britain, as the Mesopotamian campaign was yet another poor performance for the Ottomans, losing the city of Barsa on November 22nd, 1914. However, they would reclaim the city at the Battle of Shaiba. Come the attack of the Suez Canal, and the British defended fiercely with yet another Ottoman failure. However, in the Battle of Gallipoli, the Ottomans would endeavour to obstruct it now annexed in a fairly decent defensive style. Despite this, the Ottomans were far from happy with regard to their war efforts, and found their little scapegoat Armenia. In the Caucasian campaign, the Armenians did play a huge role for the Russian victories and progress, which didn't help their already heated relations with the Ottoman Empire. Soon enough, on April 24th, 1915, the Ottoman Empire would proceed to do their old stereotypical culture, which they deny this incident happened to this very day. Anyway, let's go away from this controversial topic and head back into the war fronts. Heading back to the Caucasus, the Ottomans finally began to see some form. In mid-June 1915, they began a counter-offensives against Russian units in the Lake of Van and in the city of Mazikert. Official Rafael de Nogales Mendez of Venezuela took part in the siege of Van. Yeah. A Venezuelan helped the Turks win a battle against Russians. Ottoman commanders back then were beyond shit. In early January of 1916, the Russians destroyed the Ottoman division in the Battle of Koprikoy, and on February 16th, Mahmud Kamil ordered the Third Army to retreat after numerical inferiority in comparison to the Russian Empire. In April, the Ottomans were in sheer tiredness and no longer had the strength to hold off the Russians, conceding the Pontic region and the city of Trebizond to the Russian Empire. It also didn't help that the Arabs revolted against them and that the Kingdom of Hejaz won the major battles against them without breaking a sweat. Both the Mesopotamian and Palestine campaign had come to play on Britain's side, pushing close to Iraq. No other opportunity would come for the Ottomans until Russia's revolutions in 1917, which it took back everything they lost from the Russian Empire, and even annexing the Caucasus for a short period of time. However, with Great Britain pushing into mainland Turkey, the Ottomans had no other option but to surrender on October 30th, 1918. In truth, a horrific campaign for almost every front, with the only two positives I can think of is Mustafa Kemal's strategic plans in the Battle of Gallipoli and some others here and there against the Russian Empire, and the other one being Rafael de Nogales Mendez's participation in the siege of Van. Also keep in mind that they joined the war because Germany instructed them to take down some Russian ships, and placing them in pretty bad tier, lower than Austria-Hungary itself. Portugal. They joined the war under two circumstances. 1. Britain told them to do so. 2. German Empire threatened them and would later declare war. To be honest with you, Portugal was far away from the action. They were far away from the Ottoman campaign, they were far away from the Eastern Front, and they were far away from the Western Front. They did, however, have an African territory and did send a couple men in the trenches. In the Southwest Africa campaign, however, despite a Portuguese victory, it came to the very end, with the rest of the campaign being dominated by German Empire. The Germans controlled Africa for the majority of this campaign, and it wouldn't help the Portuguese were unaware of German attacks against them. The most notable engagement for Portugal in the trench warfare campaign was the Battle of the Lees, when they had to retreat after being beaten by the Germans again. Overall, Portugal's participation in World War I was rather terrible. They were significantly dominated by the Germans, which didn't help at all. Did fuck all to you. Kingdom of Romania. If you're Romanian, how would you describe your performance? Because I think it was a total fuck up. Let's start from the beginning. After Russia's successful Bruzilov offensive, Romania thought they could also do this, and started invading Austria-Hungary. It went pretty well, capturing Transylvanian cities, up until the point where Kingdom of Bulgaria would invade in southern Dobruja, diverting their attention. With German intervention, the Romanians got absolutely fucked by the Central Powers. So much so that they had to concede some of their land and switch sides. Oddly enough, on the 10th of November 1918, the day before World War I ended, they redeclared war and joined the Entente again. Despite Kingdom of Romania redeeming themselves in the interwar period, they were unlucky to say the least, as I suspect the Romanian army would march further and further into Austro-Hungarian territory. But the rest is history, and therefore I'll place Kingdom of Romania in pretty bad tier, just behind Kingdom of Montenegro. Russian Empire. Russian Empire's campaign from start to finish has the most what-if stories, but let's save this for later. For now, Russian entry in the war was triggered by the Ottoman Empire, bombarding the Odessa parts in the Black Sea in late October 1914. In the Caucasus campaign, as I said, the Ottomans would launch a rather successful offensive, the Bergman Offensive to be precise. Despite an Ottoman victory, the Russians had winter clothing equipment and would take Karakosse and Gubeyazit, with Armenians volunteering. As for the Eastern Front, it also was successful, invading the region of Galicia, and despite a failed attempt at invading East Prussia, it didn't look too bad for now. As with their war with Austria-Hungary, they were dominating them, winning the second battle of Przemyśl, despite Austria-Hungary winning the first. Back to the Caucasian campaign, and Russia would lose the Battle of Vardanan, although Russia redeemed this by winning the Battle of Sarikamish by an immense margin, killing 90% of the Ottoman army. Now that's a contribution far bigger than the Germans did. Continuing on from that, Russia would keep their main streak as the Ottomans didn't give good enough clothing equipment, and 30,000 would die from the ridiculous cold weather. In the Eastern Front, however, they never had a victory again against the Germans. Losing the second battle of the Mauritian Lakes, eventually they maintained the city of Przemyśl after an intense battle. In mid-1915, the Russians were expelled from Russian Poland, and on top of that, the ministers of war would give them limited supplies and lack of personnel. Returning to the Caucasus now, and the Romanians would contribute more in regards to Russian victories, winning the resistance of Van, but 4 days later, the civilians would suffer a tragic genocide. On May 6, 1915, the Russians would be stopped by the 29th and 30th Ottoman divisions, and on May 21st, the Russians entered the city of Van, handing sovereignty to Armenia. In mid-June, Russia would have various attempts in the city of Mazikert and the Lake of Van, but both were denied by Ottoman defense units and surprise counterattacks. In 1916, the Russian Empire set ties on the Western Front and saw France taking a phenomenal win at the Battle of Verdun. Still thinking they could do this, they launched numerous offensives against the Germans, the most relevant one being the Lake Vauren offensive, which ended in a failure. In June 4th, 1916, the Russians would launch a fairly successful offensive, the Bruzilov offensive in full detail. Initially successful, but eventually seized due to lack of supplies. They gave motivation to Romania, however, but they would end in tragedy, as well as the Russians in the future. As for the Caucasus, this, well, they breezed through, shaking the famous city of Trebizond, in fact. But with that, it would mark the end of the war progress. In 1917, the Russian people had had enough. The war drained their supplies and people were starving. In February, they would trigger a revolution ending the Tsar kingdom after centuries of Russian monarchy and royalty. Alexander Kerensky would take charge, as well as the Russian provisional government, which came back to the scene. Kerensky thought Russians should start getting some victories again, and the Kerensky offensive was the final nail in the coffin for Russians' performance in World War I, as in October the same year, the Bolsheviks under Trotsky and Lenin would lead a communist revolution. Lenin was initially helped by the Germans, giving him funds and a train back to Petrograd. Now Russia was fighting with itself, but with the commies in complete control of Petrograd, they withdrew Russia from the war and had to concede a lot of territory following the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The bottom line is, why did it all go so wrong? Yes, they had mobilized quicker than anyone's expectations, but what if they had also developed their troops in a more accurate way? Yes, the Bruzhilov offensive was successful, but what if they actually had the supplies to advance further? Why were their supplies minimal? Who knows? Although Charles Alexander, being the commander-in-chief, was an unforgivable error, but who knows what would have happened if Russia had supplies? Maybe they could have stayed longer in the game, and perhaps, but unlikely, there would be no October Revolution. To summarize their campaign, they get into mediocre. Personally, they didn't do that bad. There are countries who performed worse. Kingdom of Serbia. They are mostly known for causing World War I mean, Gavrilo Princip was a Bosnian Serb, and what did the Serbs want? Exactly, unite all the Slavs. The Black Hand was a Serbian group supplying the assassins with what they needed, and so after Gavrilo Princip wasted Franz Ferdinand, Austria-Hungary sent an ultimatum, which Serbia denied. And thus, the July crisis turned into a bloody affair. Serbia was bombarded in Belgrade the following day by the Austro-Hungarians, and then they were attacked. However, Kingdom of Serbia had Delwar's soldiers, and would win back-to-back battles at Ser and Drina, seizing the first Austro-Hungarian offensive. Casualties in Ter was 23,000 for the Austro-Hungarians and 16,500 for the Serbians, which was good enough. In Drina, the casualties were larger, 40,000 for the Austro-Hungarians and 30,000 for the Serbs. On November 5th, 1914, Austria-Hungary had launched the second offensive. Despite Austria-Hungary's immense attack, the Serbians won decisively in the Battle of Kolubara. France and Greece handed out artillery to Serbia after they were forced to retreat from Belgrade and eventually captured by the Austro-Hungarians. And so, with the Serbian forces in a fit state, they liberated Belgrade on December 15, 1914. Austria-Hungary would soon ask help from Germany and cooperate Kingdom of Bulgaria to join the Allies, due to the embarrassing attempts of conquering Serbia. Thus, on November 7, 1915, the Germans and Austro-Hungarians began their attacks, once again, in the Drina River as well as the Sara River. As for the Bulgarians, they beat the Serbian Second Army at the Battle of Morana, as well as the Battle of Chepol, with Belgrade falling for the second time and Bulgaria cut Serbia's border connection to Greece. The Serbs had to retreat to the mountains of Albania. King Constantine of Greece wouldn't make things easier for the Serbs, as he refused to send help to the Serbs and didn't allow the Allies to hold stations in Thessaloniki. And that's why nobody likes you. Venizelos for the win! In the Great Retreat, Plašić had requested the Allies to supply their soldiers with food, clothes and guns when they nearly made it to Corfu. When they made it to Corfu, the exhausted and hungry soldiers would be sick and die as a result. The remaining Serbian soldiers, however, regained their strength and would soon travel to Thessaloniki to take part in the Macedonian front. Kingdom of Serbia made huge gains against Kingdom of Bulgaria, alongside Kingdom of Greece, and the Allies liberated parts of Serbian Macedonia. Kingdom of Greece would also take part of liberating Serbian cities such as Prizren. Serbia would go on to liberate the bud Montenegro, kicking the Austro-Hungarians out of Podgorica. After Bulgaria's surrender, the Serbs made staggering progress, liberating their country while also occupying some of Vojvodina. Eventually, they would sign the treaty with the Austro-Hungarians, taking Bosnia, and soon formed Yugoslavia. Now that is what I consider an underdog performance. They fought like heroes, Greeks, in this war, and definitely gave the Austro-Hungarians a hard time. They would also, alongside the Armenians, help the Russians in some parts of the war the Russian Empire was facing. Overall, it was an underdog performance, but not one that would help them end the war at all costs. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. Still though, they got their revenge at Bulgaria after the Surdurica massacre,
and had a major contribution in the war. But I don't think they did quite as well as the Bulgarians, considering Bulgaria maintained land they had previously occupied. So for that, they still go in high potential, but behind Kingdom of Bulgaria.
Kingdom of Siam, basically Thailand, the last nation to be in did fuck all tier. So with that out of the way, let's go to our last two big bulldogs.
Great Britain, what's commonly known as the United Kingdom, but I like to call them Great Britain, since they still had a Commonwealth, and Ireland is part of their empire. Soon after German Empire's invasion of Belgium, Great Britain declared war on the German Empire after being offended that the Germans were invading neutral countries. They would help the French at all costs, which now comes the typical argument of, the Germans also helped the Austro-Hungarians, so why do you put France that high on the list? Because, my friend, France at least had one front that Great Britain would help them, and it was the Western Front against the Germans, and it was absolutely crucial for the Allies to keep the Germans at bay. On the other hand, the Austro-Hungarians had their ass saved by Germany literally on every single front they faced. So there's my valid answer to you, mate. Anyway, Britain is unmistakably the only country in the world to find in every continent, due to the fact that they also had their Commonwealth. Within saying Commonwealth, let's see the Commonwealth's contribution outside of the UK. Canada, New Zealand and Australia, all of whom sent troops in the trenches along with India, South Africa and more. Australia took German New Guinea in Oceania, and New Zealand annexed German Samoa. In Asia, British Singapore was held by Japan, and India was almost attacked by the German Empire. In Africa, they quickly took German colonies, and in Europe, Malta and Cyprus viewed the chaos with a big bag of popcorn. Like seriously, no one bothered to invade them. Especially Cyprus. The Ottomans just looked at British Cyprus with envy, not even bothering to invade the island. But I suppose they already dealt with too many problems. Invading this island would just make things worse. Anyways, in the Western Front, the Brits won the first Battle of the Marne, but the Germans were too strong to be defeated easily and pushed till Paris, until they opened a gap and the Allies pushed back. The outcome was 2 words: trench warfare. Outside of the Western Front, and the Brits were at war with the Ottomans. They were initially successful, occupying the city of Barca and later won the Battle of Quarna. Back in the trenches, and there's one part of the war that I credit out of any of them: the Christmas truce, where thousands of men were playing football and shared stories. After that, however, they got back into the war a day later. In 1915, things came down to a halt, though that didn't prevent the German Empire from committing chlorine gas attacks against Britain and France. However, in Mesopotamia, it was going better when the Brits won the Battle of Shaiba, but the Battle of Gallipoli was a failure. As for the Suez Canal, the British defended marvellously, and they marched their Egyptian troops to 400,000 and sent them in 13 in fan dry and mounted divisions. In 1916, after the French started their own brutal battle, the Battle of Verdun, Great Britain was told by France to also start their own brutal battle, and so Britain started its own brutal battle, the Battle of the Somme, which was another failure, but not a major one, I think. But anyhow, the British Indian forces won successfully in the Battle of Sheikh Saad, as well as the Battle of the Nadi. However, the Ottomans bounced back by winning the other 2 battles at Hana and Duyaila Redoubt. In the Sinai campaign, the British, alongside the New Zealanders, would attempt to occupy Romania, and they did just that by winning yet another battle. Also strange to have a battle and an occupation named after a Roma group. Anyways, the Brits won the Battle of Magaiba on the 23rd December 1916, and had also convinced the Hejazi kingdom to enter the war, with the goal of the Hejazis being the Arab revolt and independent Arab states. When 1917 rolled around, the Germans eventually pushed back the Allies, winning the operation of Alberich. However, the Nivelle offensive was indecisive, but the most notable British victories in that conflict were the Battle of Vimy Ridge and the Battle of Passchendaele. There was also the Battle of Cambrai, where the German army capitulated and Great Britain occupied essential cities in France. Back to the Sinai campaign, and the Brits dominated the Ottomans at the First Battle of Rafah, which ended the Sinai campaign but opened a brand new campaign, the Campaign of Palestine. Unfortunately defeated by the Ottomans at both Gaza battles, and then both countries got in a stalemate. In 1918, the Brits won the Battle of Montenegro, relocating their troops closer to Palestine. Meanwhile, in the Western Front again, the Germans attempted a spring offensive. However, some of their waves were defended and won by the Allies. With the Allies preparing their attacks, and with the USA officially in the war, the Entente won the Second Battle of the Marne, and in the last phases of the war, with the Ottoman Empire, they won the last ever Battle of Shakrat, bringing the Ottomans to the negotiating table and forced them to surrender on October 30th, 1918, which was also occurred the armistice of Murdos. But there was one last front that had to come to an end. At the 100 Days Offensive, the Allies won decisively, and that was the last piece of action in World War I, as in the 11th of November 1918, Germany announced its surrender. Wow, that was impressive by the Brits. They literally dominated the Ottomans and had 4 battles with the German Empire. Despite 2 failures, some in Gallipoli, they were an ultimate powerhouse. With that being said, Great Britain gets placed in peak of their game tier, but still behind the German Empire, as I think the Germans had a bigger opportunity to win the war, as seen by the success in the Western Front at the start until nearly the end.
United States, finally, the final belligerent in World War I and this tier list. Now, how crucial was American intervention in World War I? Well, before it even started, in May 1915, the Germans sunk the boat of Lusitania with 159 Americans boarding that day. Next up, it was the German Empire again, trying to distract America's attention from the Western Front by sending a telegram to Mexico. Unknown to German Empire though, the telegram was sent into London before it could be exported to Mexico. The UK saw this and sent it to the US. This was the last straw, as in April 6, 1917, the USA declared war on German Empire. In the summer, the Americans shipped 500,000 soldiers at the start of their entry and didn't make a significant change at the Battle of Cambrai. They were absolutely necessary for the Allied defense against Germany's spring offensive and were the core for Allied victories, most notably the Battle of Saint-Mihiel and at the Meuse-Argonne offensive ending World War I. The big secret that the United States had major success in the Western Front is one word: shotguns. They gave the Germans a hard time with that weapon equipment. Yes, I know they weren't always perfect in the Western Front, and yes, I know some of you guys clarify them as the ones who came to steal the glory. But please, hear me out and be realistic. If it wasn't for them, the Allies and Central Powers would be stuck in the trenches for at least another 2 years. So with that clarification, the United States gets into peak of their game tier, taking Bulgaria's bronze medal away from them. Finally, the end of the video. Oh, it's a blessing. I can't hide my exhaust. I am so fatigued right now. I just want the video to end. I just want to press upload and let the video be there on YouTube. Like, god damn it. Also, very few of you have made it this far without even skipping or clicking away. If you made it this far, and even if you have skipped, I want you to make your own list in the comments below of the country's contributions in World War I. I want to see your opinion about this. What's your opinion? For real, I want to know your opinion about this. Rank every belligerent of the war, S to F tier, and I'll share my thoughts with you in the comments below. Yeah, I'm incredibly fatigued. I can feel how Spectrum felt making that World War II video. I mean, he had to make like 2 parts. I can imagine his fatigue right now. It was... holy crap. So yeah, any of you wondering, if you want me to make World War II tier list, I am not making World War II tier list before I write Panhellenics. After I write Panhellenics, I'm going to focus on that. I'm not doing it before the summer. It's going to be tough for me to do that. I'm going to have to study very hard for my exams to pass at university as well. God. Right. Anyways, time to end this really quickly. Whatever. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Peace.